Welcome, everybody. Today, we are very lucky to have the lovely Tiffy Rubinat. She is the CEO of Wealthi. She is leading the frontier of these new Latinos that are coming into Australia, learning how to invest in real estate, buying up property, and building wealthier lives. Tiffy, you've bought lots of property since our last catch up. How have you been?
I've been great. Thanks for that massive intro, Dom. That's very nice of you. It's been a while since we've done a podcast together, so a lot has happened, really. Where should we start?
Well, I want to start with what's happening in the market. You're in a very fortunate position where you bought property around Australia, you bought property overseas as well, and you talk to lots and lots and lots of clients. You've been traveling around, doing different shows, digital events, and you're very well informed. So I'm interested to learn from you what you're seeing at the cold phase, what you're experiencing on the property side, so how vendors are treating you, but then also what you're experiencing with purchasers. Are they hot or cold? Is it the market, going up, down, left or right? What is it? What are you feeling out there?
Okay. So the first thing that I'm seeing with my own eyes and hearing through speaking with everyone, and this is in the news, right? We're seeing massive migration. We know that there is around 650,000 people expected to migrate into Australia in the next 2 years, and we're already facing a housing shortage. Every friend that I speak to and every person that I meet is talking about, hey, my rent has gone up and I'm trying to find a new place and there's nothing out there, right? Which is amazing. And then I was speaking with my neighbor over the weekend. She owns her apartment in the same place where I rent because I apply the rent vesting strategy. So I live in the eastern suburbs. And she was telling me, hey, I'm actually thinking I might be moving. And it's just that I'm not willing to sell without having secured my purchase for the next one because there's nothing out there, right? So whether you're renting, where you're trying to buy, supply is in a massive shortage. So that's basically what I'm seeing out there.
That's really interesting because with all of this interest rate rises, people talking about demand generators, we're not talking about the whole picture. We're only talking about the cost of capital rather than the movement of people, investments in infrastructure, economic development, and then supply. So I'm glad you brought all of that up. I'm experiencing very similar things. The supply has dried up in two fronts. One, the existing market, there are record low levels of supply. I think it's below 10 or 15% below the 5-year average. So there's not a lot of people out there that are wanting to sell. We're not seeing a lot of distressed stock. People that have people are managing their variable interest rates. May is coming. That May fixed rate cliff is coming. We don't anticipate more stock coming as a result of that. But also, the big thing is everyone's stuck in the short-term picture with real estate, and it is a medium to long-term play. We, as you have said, are going to experience the largest population increase in Australia's history. There are hundreds of thousands of migrants coming into the country. Students, tourism is still doing what it's doing, and there's no stock. Yeah. So it is a really good time for a property investor, but it is a terrible time if you're a renter or even a home buyer. It's very difficult if you're a home buyer.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I'm seeing is you've mentioned we do specialize on the Latin American community because I am from Latin America. And the one thing that Latin Americans understand really well, and we've been speaking about this since 2020, so it's not new news, but it's inflation. So background is if I was sharing inflation numbers back in 2020, in Argentina, everything's gotten worse. So if in 2020 inflation was, I think, 50% per year, now it's gotten to 100% per year. So it's ridiculous, right? No one knows what things are worth. I traveled back in December 2022. I hadn't been there for 5 years. I didn't know any of the bills. I felt like a drug dealer going out shopping and taking this pile of cash to buy a hoodie. They were counting the bills with a machine. It's ridiculous. And people understand really well that with inflation, every day that you have money sitting in your bank account just loses purchasing power. So what we've been seeing for the last 12 months, there has been a bit of a sentiment change and not as hot as in 2020, 2021, and the first half of 2022. But the Latin Americans have not seen it that way. So the Latin Americans who are looking for investments, they're like, I don't want this cash is burning in my bank account. I don't want it there. Let's go and do something with it. Let's invest. Whereas in 2020, most of the people coming into the market were owner occupiers and especially first home buyers. Now, in the last 12 months, let's call it, we've seen a lot of investors come to us saying, I need this money to be doing something more than sitting in a bank account.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight. You've got a whole host of Latin Americans that are are familiar with inflation. It's a very extreme version of it. 100% or double and triple digit inflation numbers are crippling to a nation. Where Australia's seeing less than 10%, sort of 6 point something percent. It still is a hidden cost of holding onto your cash. And one thing that a lot of Australians don't appreciate is over time, your position weakens. And unless your income is growing faster than inflation, you're going to have some massive issues. And I don't know that many people that are out there getting 7% increases to their pay year on year. What is driving this massive Latin American wave of investors? I'm loving seeing it. It's excellent to see so many sophisticated, intelligent investors making logical decisions. Aside from the inflation, do you see this wave continuing? Do you see more Latin Americans buying in Australia? What are you seeing on the cold face?
Definitely numbers are growing, and I think there's a few factors. One is a lot of the people that we're dealing with, Dom, have migrated into Australia. And as migration numbers keep growing, Latin American numbers have been growing. They're not as big as Chinese migration or Indian migration for sure, but they have been consistently growing for the last 10, 20 years, right? So now you're getting a lot of the people who have come out of COVID and getting their visas granted, like access to PRs through different pathways. And in the life of someone who has migrated, one big milestone is getting your permanent residence. Like you're celebrating, you have now, you have the certainty that you can stay in the country and you're no longer dependent of your employer to do so. And as you hit that milestone, you know that you're not going to be spending as much money as you were spending the previous years on different visas, because you do spend a lot of money on visas. So suddenly, if you keep your lifestyle as you have been for the last few years, you can save a lot more money that you're no longer spending on visas. And you're like sort of going into that next stage of like, okay, I've now secured a future, I have this good income, and I'm starting to save. And I don't know what to do with the money. I don't know the rules of the game. And whereas Australians, everyone has my parents, my uncles, my aunties, my cousins, everyone's an expert and everyone knows. Latin Americans are very open to learning from experts. That's probably one of the bigger differences. And they've moved their entire lives with one or two suitcases. And they're okay with not owning their own home. Like they all dream of that Australian dream or American dream of owning your own home. A lot of the migrants don't need it. So they're okay with just going and investing. They want to live that new lifestyle of like, if I want to go traveling, if I want to achieve financial freedom, if whatever, then I don't need my own home. I'm happy to invest, so I start generating different passive income streams.
I think it's a clever way of investing, and it's a modern way of thinking about property ownership as opposed to having to have my own home. It's crippling in many instances. That Australian dream is a beautiful one, but it is crippling to many, many people because they get pinned to this idea of a home they have to have and will do anything or come at any cost. And any cost sometimes can send them backwards. So it's good to see people making good, sensible decisions. Now, just quickly, I want to talk about that journey for a lot of the people that are migrating into Australia. Because a lot of people listening and watching are not familiar in what it means. You know, let's just set the preface. Let's just say 600,000 people come into Australia. They're migrating here. They cannot buy real estate. Well, not easily. They can do it, but it is quite difficult. What that does, firstly, is it puts a huge amount of pressure on the rental system. But after they've gone through some time of gestating and they get their permanent residency, that's when they have the ability to buy. Now, I want to talk about this because, one, we've got about 600,000 people coming into the country, but two, there's about 900,000 people sitting in our system waiting to get their permanent residency. And it's at that point where there's the freedom to go and buy real estate. So they go from renters to purchasers, and there's a big swing in the amount of demand. So can you talk about that timeline and what that journey is like for a migrant coming in, learning, getting their visas, and then purchasing?
Well, there's a whole suite, right, of journeys, many, many visas, and I'm not an expert in all of them. But usually, if you arrive here with a student visa, depending on what you're studying, it's pretty tough to get a pathway towards a permanent residency. A lot of the people that come here just pay for the cheapest course they can get in order to just be able to stay, but they don't think it through and how can I go into my permanent residency. Now, some people do get degrees within Australia that can take them down to a post-study work visa, and that has a path to a PR. But a lot of people go down the route of getting a sponsored visa, right? So a sponsored visa is your employer giving you the chance to work for them in exchange of a visa. So there's a whole range. Now, the minimum time period that I'm saying you will have to have under these visas in order to progress into applying to a PR, and it's at least for sponsors 3 years. It used to be 2. So when I arrived here, I had the old sponsor visa, and that's how I arrived in Australia. And after 2 years, I could apply for permanent residency. They redid the whole system, and now there's 2 types of sponsors. One doesn't take you towards a PR, and the other one that does. You have to wait 3 years and then apply, and maybe wait 1 or 2 more years, whatever it is, right? So for us, the reason why that PR is so important is because even if foreign investors can invest in Australia, the biggest hurdle is accessing finance. Mm-hmm. So finance from having like good deals from an interest rate point of view and not just paying ridiculously high interest rates, and also loan to value ratios. It's very different if you have to save a 10 or 20% deposit versus having to save a 30 or more percent deposit, right? It requires a lot more cash. And still we see a lot of our clients who have raised 20, 30, and 40% deposits just because they had to save and they couldn't get into the market because they couldn't secure the finance. But it's people who are from day one have to pay their dues and make a lot of sacrifices at work, at home, etc. And so as they keep progressing, suddenly they're great savers. They're willing to do sacrifices and whatever it takes. And if getting finance isn't easy, they'll still go and get everything done as required to access the finance. But yeah, it's a long while, and I've seen people done. I said 4 years as a minimum, but I've seen people who takes them 8, 10 years to get the PR.
This is a really good point. And what I love hearing about this is there's a few things that resonate with me. One, it reminds me of my parents, but also it's this wave, a community of people that have to work really hard. It sounds like to me that it's difficult to get the visa. You need to have some kind of qualification. You have to have some kind of track record. There are a number of requirements in order for you to become a permanent resident. So you're getting hardworking, good savers, dedicated individuals that are here, that are wanting to build a better life. It's a very productive cohort of people. And I've noticed from our clients, they save hard, they work hard, they get degrees. They're willing to do the extra things necessary to advance themselves and their families. So it's it's inspiring in many ways, but it's also very promising. And to me, it's a good leading indicator of where the country is going. One of the big leading indicators of economic development is migration and allowing people into a country, especially when there's such a big upwardly mobile cohort of people that are in the prime of their earning capacity. So it's very encouraging to see that all these people coming in and investing all over Australia. You and I had the freedom or the luxury of going to the ALABAC with the Australian Latin American
Business
Council.
Yes.
And we got to sit down with Argentinian government officials, and someone at that boardroom said bravely that one of the biggest exports of Argentina and Latin America that is hugely detrimental to the country and the continent is its people.
100%. And that has been going on for quite a while, but it has definitely accelerated in the last 5 to 10 years. And that's where Australia gains. Nothing's perfect, right? We would say. And I know there's a lot of people who are very worried. You have a housing shortage and 600,000 people coming in. How are you going to go about it, right? Like people get displaced. But still, there is a lot of positives from migration. Like more people demanding products and services, it's more sales, it's just economic turnaround. There's also a lot of shortage in many industries of, like, we have the lowest unemployment rates we've seen in Australia in, I don't know, I think forever. And so there's people needed everywhere in almost every industry. So in some you win, in some you lose, but definitely there's a lot of upside to migration.
I want to quote you. We were purchasing property, or you were buying a property in 2020, I think it was, 2019.
2021? Was it the Melbourne one?
Yes, Melbourne one.
Yeah, early 2021.
Early 2021. Peak fear, lots of scary times, and you and I were sitting and chatting, and you said, these prices, we will never see them again. We've just come off about a 10% price decline. How do you feel about the market now? Are we going up? Are we going down? Are we going to see these prices again?
We're never going to see these prices again. And people keep discussing the good old days when everything was cheap. In 10 years from now, we're going to miss today's prices. Like, we're going to think back to the pandemic, end of the pandemic, 2023, whatever it is. It's like we won't be able to believe how much prices have moved, because that's it, basically. I remember, Dom, so I shared this story with you last week. One of my best friends, she bought right next to me in 2021 in Melbourne. We bought a townhouse, and I told her we're never going to see these prices again. And so we bought a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bathroom, 2-car spot for $450K. Close to a train station, commuting 30 minutes away from Melbourne CBD. And effectively now those similar townhouses are around the $600,000 mark. And so she's ready to buy the next one. And I found her a great deal, as we usually do with all of our clients. And this new price point is $689. So she's like, Tiffy, I'm feeling a bit out of my comfort zone, because I thought, let's go and buy another $450K townhouse. And I was like, yeah, that I told you that wouldn't exist. Great for you. You made the most. You took action back in 2021 and you entered the Australian market. You've done very well with that investment, but now you have to align expectations towards reality. And a $600K purchase price is a very affordable price point for Australian standards.
$600,000 is very affordable. $600,000 wasn't affordable 10 years ago. That was a big price, but now it's the bottom. It is. That's entry,
Yeah.
Especially if you want to get something quality. Now, Tiffy, I want to ask you a couple more questions. I know you're a busy lady. You're the CEO of the business, and you got a hell of a lot of stuff to do daily. What parts of the property market are most interesting to you for new entrants into the market? People that are trying to get in, they want to buy their first investment. What is exciting to you? Where are you seeing the most energy, and where do you see the most promise? I guess you can take in two directions. Obviously, you like to cash flow, then there's growth. Let's talk about a couple.
Yeah. So if I have to select the one market that I have been saying for a while, it's definitely Melbourne. I still think there's plenty of upside for Melbourne. I just see it as a very safe bet because Melbourne and Sydney, tier one cities, population of Melbourne meant to surpass the population of Sydney by 2031. And we're still seeing a massive price gap between Melbourne and Sydney, and that's where the opportunity lies. So right now, the upside with Melbourne is that finally rents have started catching up. So Dom, you and I were running cash flow analysis for certain projects at certain price points, maybe 12 to 18 months ago, and cash flows didn't look good. And now, because the rents have grown so much in certain areas, finally cash flows are strong for a tier one city where usually tier one cities don't yield that well. So a great moment in time to get into a tier one city, which is usually a capital growth strategy and still get a strong cash flow, really. So that's definitely my favorite city. And I see a lot of people saying, if we keep it simple, it's a no-brainer, right? And you talk a lot about keeping it simple in your book. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
I'm happy to always talk about my book. Why not some shameless plug? Yeah.
Let's talk about. I've been reading it. I'm 90% there. I want to tell the audience I'm still 10% away from finishing the book. I loved it.
Thank you.
As in, I do consider myself now a more advanced investor. I'm not
Certainly
in the
are.
early days, and still I found it was a great refresher. And what you say, I know you live and breathe through it in your day to day. We practice it at Wealthi, and I do it with my own investments as well. So I think I'm gonna. Can I share just one example, Dom?
Share as many as you're happily to talk about.
So I think you do a great job in just keeping it basic as to how you analyze markets and areas to choose where to start investing. And I'm going to give an example of something that I hadn't thought through. And I definitely saw you do it, and I started doing it once I replicated what you were doing. So when I joined Wealthi early 2020, one of the first areas that we went to explore because we really liked the potential for growth, we were going there, and Don was like, no, Tiffy, we're going to go one step at a time. Let's visit the coffee shop. Let's talk to some locals. And I was like, sure, do you want to talk to locals? And I'm not shy. I'm not shy at all. But we were walking through the street and you were stopping people, and just, it didn't matter whether they were renting, whether they were owners. You just wanted to know what they thought about the area they lived in. And people started mentioning a lot of very valuable pieces of information that we would only know if we were living there. And just through talking, and it's very basic, I had to see you do it to then say, okay, this is basic. I don't know how I haven't thought this through. But if I'm exploring new areas, let's just go and talk to people who live in the area. And yeah, like, where do they shop? What do they like visiting? Do they walk? Do they do any sports around? Like, I don't know. When you start hearing about the streets, you start hearing about the swimming pool they go to, whatever it is, but you start acquiring information like a local, and you think like a local, which is the title of that section in your book, which is great.
Look, I completely agree. Thinking like a local is such an important strategy that's easy to overlook, especially when you're on your desktop doing all the analysis. It's really important to remember with real estate, it is a physical thing that you've got to go out, see and touch. Just the other day, I was walking the streets and I'm scouting now for a house to buy. And a gentleman was walking past and I said hello to him, and we got to talking for about half an hour. He introduced me to two of his neighbors. I got to learn that the main road was a thoroughfare for the tradies that come in. And it was a really important pieces of information. I knew that the pub was going to be really loud at this time of day, and they're doing renovations at this section over there. There's so much that a local will pick up and tell you, especially if they're an older local. This guy, I think his name was Bob the Builder. Bob the Builder had been there for 30 years. So he knew everybody in the street. He knew exactly what was going on in all the locations. And by spending half an hour with Bob, I learned so much about the area. Another hint that I really, really like, and you do this really well, is talking to agents. Agents are not there to hurt you, to bite you, to rip you off. Agents have all the information for you, and talking to an agent is an excellent way as a new purchaser to find out who is likely to buy this property in the future. Where is the capital appreciation going to come from? If I buy this house and I spend $100,000, will I be overcapitalizing, or is there a huge ceiling because empty nesters are going to buy it, young families are going to buy it? Will I have to create space for a caravan, X, Y, and Z? So it's talking to people is one of the best ways that you're going to learn about real estate. Completely agree with you, Tiffy.
100%.
I have another question for you. It is, it's called an LFYP. It's called Lessons for Young Players. People, players of life. And it's a story. My friends and I always talk about it. What's your LFYP? When you have like a big night out and you go and eat McDonald's and you end up feeling really sick. That lesson is don't go and eat McDonald's at 3 a.m. or whatever it is, right? So it's about what big mistake have you made that now changed the way that you behave going into the future? So what big mistake have you made in your life that have taught you about how you'd like to invest or behave going into the future that's invaluable to you?
So I learned through the first property that I purchased that buying cheap doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to use less money, basically, right? So you might be buying cheap and spending a lot of cash in a renovation. I've shared this story in the past, but I'm going to recap it. So the first property I bought, I got a builder. I got more than one builder, but builders were quoting 50, 55K renovations. And basically, I told myself, cool, I've worked in enough projects to know that things don't go according to plan. I'm just going to put 10K extra of things that I'm not expecting that could potentially go wrong. And if my financials work, assuming a $65,000 renovation, then let's go ahead. So that's what we did. And the renovation, unfortunate things happened. The renovation ended up costing $80,000. So things that you're not expecting happen, and it's okay. I'm still glad that A, I took action. B, I learned a lot, which is really important. That property and the next two I bought more than doubled in price in 2 years, which was amazing, and I can never again expect that. But after that, I started deprioritizing the cheaper properties that have also brought me a lot of headaches because of the low quality tenants, and started going down the route of I'd rather go for something that either it's brand new or at least in a lot better shape and not as cheap, basically. So that was probably one of my bigger learnings from the early days.
So hot lesson there is cheap for a reason. Look for something that's better quality if you want to get a good result.
And I love cheap, but just I don't go as cheap anymore. And yeah, I think I'm now focusing a lot more on the area and the quality of the asset.
Good lesson.
Yeah.
Last question. Here's my shameless plug for my book, You Won't Fuck It Up, in all good booksellers everywhere. So what is the one piece of advice that you'd give new investors and homeowners so they don't fuck up their next property purchase?
So when you're starting, the first one's the hardest you will ever have to face, and you will never, ever be 100% sure. So just don't wait, because one way to fuck it up is just thinking, I'm not in a hurry, let's wait. Suddenly you start seeing that prices are moving on average 10K per month, and your savings, which could afford you a certain level of property, 6 months down the track, afford you way less. So just by taking action and moving forward, you don't have to know everything. You can always ask for help and use the guidance of someone who's more experienced or an expert, but just get started and don't sit waiting, basically. That's probably my advice.
Love it. So the big big lesson for you is just take action. I really, really believe in taking action. It's probably one of my biggest strengths and weaknesses. Taking too much action is an issue, but
Yeah, Dom has the other problem, guys. Dom wants to take too much action all at once.
it's really, really important to take action because you will never know everything. There is no perfect environment, and lightning is not going to strike you and say, this is the golden deal. Every deal that you look at is going to have some problems with it. So it's important for you to understand your budget, understand what you're trying to go for, and just take massive action. Just run at it with all fire and fury to make it happen. And you'll find the universe will conspire to get it done. There's going to be difficulty, but if you are dedicated to and you've got enough resolve, you will get it done.
Agree.
Tiffy, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast today. It has been a while. And thank you for all the work you're doing in Wealthi. I'm loving watching your portfolio grow. It won't be long before you are building Tiffy Land, which is going to be a whole village. So all of you stay tuned. And maybe next time we can talk about some of your more sophisticated investments for the people that are more advanced. So thank you for today.
Thank you, Dom. Have a great one.
See you later, everybody.